This is not a World War II or Holocaust museum. In fact, those events are barely mentioned. Instead, the center frankly analyzes the origin and evolution of the Nazi phenomenon to help better understand it and help prevent it from ever happening again.
Imagine a group of men driven by an ideology so powerful, they believed their mission was not only justified but sacred. Men who saw themselves as the guardians of racial purity, willing to murder millions to secure their vision of the future. They didn't just follow orders, they became the architects of unimaginable horror. This is the story of the SS, an elite force of brutality, blind loyalty, and unspeakable acts. Their legacy still haunts us today, reminding us of the terrifying cost of fanaticism.
In this vacuum of power, a fringe movement claiming to be the champion of the oppressed emerged. They dressed in intimidating brown shirt uniforms, roamed the streets in gangs, and wanted to restore Germany's national pride. They called themselves the National Socialists, or Nazis. Their leader, Adolf Hitler.
In the early years of Nazi Germany, a small but highly influential group emerged, known as the SS, or Schutzstaffel. These men were considered the racial elite, supposedly superior to the rest of humanity. They believed they were tasked with enforcing a vision of a pure German state, one that required the elimination of adversaries, the persecution of Jews, and the destruction of what they saw as impure elements in society. This group became the backbone of Adolf Hitler's regime, and their commitment to National Socialism was unwavering. The SS were more than just soldiers. They were ideologues, deeply committed to the racist doctrines that Hitler had espoused in his book Mein Kampf. They embraced the idea of racial purity, believing in the superiority of the Aryan race. For them, National Socialism was not just a political ideology, but a way of life, one that justified extreme actions in the name of protecting and advancing the German people. They saw themselves as the chosen few, ready to do whatever was necessary to ensure the triumph of their beliefs. In the years following Hitler's rise to power, the SS expanded rapidly. Many of its early members volunteered out of a sense of duty, believing they were joining an elite force that would protect the nation and the ideals they held dear. The SS became a symbol of strength, discipline, and most importantly, loyalty to the Führer. To be a part of the SS meant adhering to a strict code of conduct, one that required total devotion to the cause and unquestioning obedience to orders. The SS were not just a military unit but a political and ideological force. Their motto, *Meine Ehre heißt Treue, to one my honor is loyalty, was a constant reminder of their commitment to Hitler and to the Nazi state. This motto reflected the SS's core belief that their loyalty to the regime was the highest honor they could attain. They believed that through their actions, they would help shape the future of Germany, creating a nation free from what they considered the corrupting influences of other races, particularly Jews. For those who joined the SS, the organization represented much more than just a career or a means of serving their country. It became a way of life, an identity. They were the elite, the best of the best, and their role in the Nazi state was not just to fight but to embody the ideals of National Socialism. They were trained to be warriors, but also to be cultural guardians, enforcing the values that Hitler believed were vital to the survival of the German people. The first members of the SS were primarily recruited from the Nazi Party's supporters, but as the organization grew, so did its reach. Young men, eager to prove their loyalty and commitment to the cause, flocked to join. They were told they were joining an elite group that would be the foundation of a new Germany, one that would be free from the shame of its past and the influence of foreign powers. They were promised strength, prestige, and a sense of purpose. One of the SS's key beliefs was the idea of racial purity. This was not just a theoretical concept, but a fundamental part of their worldview. To be a member of the SS, you had to meet strict racial criteria. You had to prove your German ancestry, tracing your lineage back at least to the 18th century. If you were of Jewish descent, no matter how distant, you were automatically excluded. The SS believed that only those who could prove their pure Aryan heritage were fit to serve in their ranks. This focus on racial purity was a reflection of the deeply entrenched anti-Semitic and xenophobic beliefs that were central to Nazi ideology. Jews were viewed not only as inferior, but as a threat to the very existence of the German nation. Hitler's vision of a racially pure Germany was one where Jews, along with other groups deemed undesirable, were excluded from society. The SS took this belief to the extreme, advocating for the systematic removal of Jews from German society, and eventually, their extermination. While the SS were initially tasked with providing personal protection for Nazi leaders, including Hitler, their role quickly expanded. As their influence grew, they became involved in all aspects of the Nazi regime, including the enforcement of laws, the suppression of political opposition, and the management of concentration camps. By 1934, the SS had become a key player in the Nazi state, with Heinrich Himmler at the helm. Himmler was not only the head of the SS but also a key architect of Nazi policies related to racial purity and the persecution of Jews. The SS's role in the Nazi regime was not limited to military action. They were also responsible for enforcing ideological conformity throughout German society. They were tasked with ensuring that every aspect of life, from education to culture, adhered to the principles of National Socialism. They were the eyes and ears of the regime, watching for any signs of dissent or disloyalty. Those who were suspected of opposing the Nazi Party were swiftly removed, either through imprisonment or execution. Despite the horrors that would follow, many SS members were initially motivated by a sense of pride and duty. They believed they were part of something greater than themselves, working to build a new Germany that would be free from the shame of defeat in World War I. The sense of camaraderie and purpose that the SS provided was powerful. It gave many of its members a sense of identity and belonging that they had not found elsewhere. They were told they were the protectors of Germany's future, and this belief was enough to convince many to follow orders without question, no matter how brutal or inhumane those orders might be. The documentary moves beyond just explaining the rise of the SS to look at the lives of some of its former members. One such individual is Vera Furchner, who was only a child when Hitler came to power. Furchner recalls how the SS's strict discipline and military rituals fascinated him. The sense of pride he felt in being part of the SS is evident as he remembers the drills and the sense of belonging that came with being a member of this elite group. For him, the SS represented strength, order, and purpose in a chaotic world. However, not all SS veterans shared the same views. While some broke with the ideology after the war, others remained steadfast in their beliefs. One such individual, Kurt Baukhausen, who was part of the SS Death's Head Division, recalls how the SS instilled in him a belief in the purity of the German people. Baukhausen, now in his 90s, explains that what mattered to the SS was not just the individual but the collective. The idea of family, of ensuring the survival of the German people, was central to their ideology. He talks about how the SS promoted the idea of having many children, seeing it as a duty to the nation. Looking back on this history, it's difficult to fathom how such an ideology could have taken root. Yet, for many of these men, it made perfect sense. The world they lived in was one where the past had been erased, where the humiliation of defeat in World War I and the economic turmoil of the 1920s had created a vacuum. In that vacuum, Hitler's message of racial purity and national revival resonated deeply. For the SS, joining the Nazi cause was more than just a political decision, it was a moral imperative. The SS's legacy is a tragic one, marked by the atrocities committed during the Holocaust and the war crimes that followed. Yet, understanding the roots of this fanaticism is essential in comprehending how such horrors came to pass. The SS were not born monsters but were created by a society that embraced racist ideology, a state that rewarded loyalty over morality, and a leadership that exploited the fears and frustrations of its people. As the Nazi regime tightened its grip on Germany, the role of the SS grew even more significant. By this time, the SS had evolved from a group of Hitler's bodyguards into one of the most powerful and feared organizations in Nazi Germany. Their involvement in the oppression of political opponents, the enforcement of Nazi ideology, and most infamously, the systematic murder of millions of Jews, solidified their place in history as one of the key perpetrators of the Holocaust. The SS's rise to power came with the backing of Heinrich Himmler, a man whose vision for the SS went beyond mere military discipline. Himmler was not only the head of the SS, but also the architect of many of the policies that would lead to the mass murder of Jews and other so-called undesirables. Under Himmler's leadership, the SS became the chief enforcers of Hitler's racial laws. They were tasked with ensuring that anyone deemed racially impure or politically subversive was either removed from society or exterminated. This was the beginning of a chilling new chapter in Nazi Germany, one that would see the SS at the heart of some of the most heinous crimes in human history. At this stage, the SS was no longer just a military unit, it had become a tool for racial and political purification. The initial focus on providing protection for Nazi leaders expanded into full-scale control over the police, military operations, and the suppression of any resistance to the regime. Their reach was extensive, and their influence over all aspects of life in Nazi Germany was profound. The SS were responsible for enforcing Nazi ideology within the country, and ensuring that all Germans, regardless of their personal beliefs, adhered to the values of National Socialism. One of the SS's most notorious roles was in the creation and operation of the concentration camps. These camps, initially set up to detain political enemies and perceived threats to the regime, soon became the centers of the Nazi policy of racial extermination. The SS ran these camps, where millions of Jews, Romani people, disabled individuals and others were subjected to brutal conditions, forced labor, starvation and mass murder. The infamous death camps, such as Auschwitz, were run by the SS, and their members carried out the horrific task of exterminating the millions of people who were sent there. As the war progressed, the SS's role in carrying out atrocities expanded beyond the camps. They were involved in massacres and executions across Europe, targeting anyone who was considered a threat to the Nazi state. One of the most chilling aspects of the SS was their willingness to carry out these acts without hesitation. Many SS members believed they were justified in their actions, convinced by the Nazi propaganda that portrayed their victims as subhuman and a threat to the survival of the German race. This ideology was deeply embedded in the SS's training, and for many of them it became impossible to question the morality of what they were doing. To question the orders of the SS was to betray the nation, and the punishment for such betrayal was severe. Some former SS members, like Kurt Baukhazen, reflect on their time in the SS with a sense of nostalgia for the sense of purpose it gave them. Baukhazen, now in his 90s, recalls his time in the SS with a strange sense of reverence, describing the rigid discipline and the emphasis on racial purity. He talks about the importance of family, marriage and children in the SS, seeing these as central to their idea of a healthy society. To him, being a part of the SS was not just about loyalty to the regime, but about upholding what they believed to be the ideals of a strong and pure nation. However, there were others in the SS who later repudiated their involvement in the regime's crimes. These individuals often point to their early indoctrination, noting how the Nazi regime's propaganda targeted young minds and shaped their beliefs from an early age. Many of them, like Ver Furchner, a former SS member, were only children when they first encountered Hitler's messages. Furchner describes how the military aspect of the SS appealed to him. He was drawn to the sharp discipline, the strict orders, and the sense of belonging that came with being part of the SS. For him, it was not just about blind loyalty to Hitler, but a sense of pride in being part of something greater than himself. He recalls being taught to salute, stand at attention, and embody the military virtues that were glorified in Nazi ideology. Yet, despite the sense of duty many SS members felt, there were moments when they were confronted with the reality of what their actions meant. While some members, like Baukhazen, rationalized their involvement by focusing on the concept of family and racial purity, others began to question their roles in the atrocities committed by the regime. One of the most significant moments of reckoning came during the mass exterminations that took place across Europe. The SS were directly involved in the brutal killings of Jews, Romani people, disabled individuals, and political dissidents. These massacres were carried out with chilling efficiency, as the SS members followed orders without question, often seeing themselves as protectors of the German race rather than perpetrators of violence. As the war drew to a close and Germany began to face defeat, many SS members found themselves trapped in a moral and psychological conflict. Some remained loyal to the regime to the end, continuing to justify their actions with the belief that they were fighting for a noble cause. Others, however, began to experience guilt and remorse, questioning the ideological foundation that had led them to commit such horrific crimes. For those who survived the war, the post-war years were filled with difficult reckonings. Many were imprisoned by the Allies and faced trials for their roles in the crimes committed during the Holocaust. Yet, despite their involvement in these atrocities, some SS veterans maintained that they were simply following orders and were not responsible for the actions they had carried out. The idea of blind loyalty to the regime was ingrained in the SS's ethos from the beginning. Their motto, "My honor is loyalty," encapsulated the idea that personal morality should be subordinated to loyalty to the state. The SS was not just an organization that carried out orders, it was an organization that sought to instill in its members an unwavering commitment to Nazi ideology. This commitment was so strong that for many SS members, it blinded them to the humanity of their victims and to the moral consequences of their actions. The atrocities committed by the SS were not the result of a few rogue individuals, but the product of a deeply ingrained ideological system that dehumanized entire groups of people and justified their murder as a means of ensuring the survival of the German people. The SS's involvement in the persecution of Jews, the formation of concentration camps, and their role in the military offensives that led to the deaths of millions are just some of the horrors they inflicted. However, their legacy is not only one of violence and hatred. It is also a reminder of the dangers of ideological extremism and the consequences of blind obedience to an authoritarian regime. The SS were in many ways the perfect example of how an organized group, steeped in racist ideology and driven by a sense of superior purpose, could carry out unimaginable acts of cruelty. For those who survived the war and lived to recount their stories, the years that followed were filled with shame, guilt, and the struggle to come to terms with what they had been a part of. Some, like Bakazin, remain unrepentant, believing that they were justified in their actions. Others, like Ferkner, have struggled with their past and sought to distance themselves from the ideology that once defined their lives. The testimonies of these former SS members provide an important glimpse into the minds of those who were involved in the Nazi regime, offering a sobering reminder of the power of propaganda and the dangers of a state that encourages violence in the name of racial purity. The SS, once hailed as the elite force protecting the German state, ultimately became synonymous with genocide and war crimes. The moral rot at the heart of their actions is undeniable, and their legacy serves as a warning to future generations about the dangers of unchecked power and the capacity for evil that can be unleashed when a society loses its moral compass. As World War II progressed, the SS's role in Nazi Germany expanded beyond that of a police force and a tool for enforcing ideological purity. The SS, now firmly entrenched in the Nazi war machine, played an essential part in the invasion of multiple countries, including Poland, France, Yugoslavia, Greece, and the Soviet Union. They were no longer merely a group of elite soldiers. They became the vanguard of Nazi expansion, responsible for carrying out brutal atrocities on the front lines as well as behind them. The Waffen-SS, the military arm of the SS, was created to fight alongside the German army, the Wehrmacht, but with a key difference. While the Wehrmacht was primarily concerned with military strategy and territorial expansion, the Waffen-SS was equally focused on carrying out Nazi ideological goals. This division led to a deep entanglement of military operations and racial policies, as the SS soldiers were not only tasked with defeating enemies on the battlefield, but also with carrying out genocidal acts against civilians, particularly Jews, in the territories they conquered. One of the SS's most notorious roles during the war was in the execution of the Holocaust. The SS were responsible for rounding up Jews, Romani people, political dissidents, and others deemed undesirable by the regime, and transporting them to concentration and extermination camps. In these camps, millions of people were systematically murdered in gas chambers, shot, or worked to death. The SS soldiers who carried out these atrocities were often just following orders, believing that they were part of something greater, an ideology that justified their actions. For the SS, the war provided an opportunity to prove their loyalty to the regime and their commitment to the Nazi cause. The SS were promised glory and honor, and many soldiers believed they were part of a larger mission to save Germany from its enemies and secure a bright future for the Aryan race. However, as the war turned against Germany, and the Allied forces began their advance into German-occupied territories, the SS found themselves fighting a losing battle. Despite their earlier belief in their own superiority, they were now facing the inevitable collapse of the Nazi state. As the war came to an end and Germany was defeated, the SS's crimes became impossible to ignore. Many SS soldiers tried to flee, hiding their identities and attempting to escape prosecution for their involvement in the atrocities. Some managed to evade capture for years, while others were tried and convicted at the Nuremberg trials for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Despite their involvement in some of history's most heinous acts, many former SS members continued to justify their actions, claiming they were merely following orders or were victims of Nazi propaganda. For those who were convicted, the aftermath of the war was filled with shame and guilt. However, the legacy of the SS lives on in the horrifying history of the Holocaust and the atrocities committed by the Nazi regime. The men who were part of the SS left behind a legacy of destruction, not only for the victims of their crimes, but for themselves as well. Their role in the war, particularly in the genocide of the Jewish people, marks them as one of the most notorious groups in modern history. Today, the memory of the SS serves as a chilling reminder of the dangers of blind loyalty to a regime that promotes hatred and violence. The story of the SS is not just about the atrocities they committed, but about the ways in which ideology, propaganda, and a sense of superiority can lead individuals to perpetrate some of the worst crimes imaginable. It's a lesson that continues to resonate as we confront the challenges of prejudice, extremism, and hatred in the world today.